Hello, students. I am Vidya from English Magus. Welcome to today's video lesson, the last lesson, which ironically is Chapter 1 in Class 12 English core book Flamingo. The last lesson, by Alphonse Daudet, is a poignant story that reflects on themes of language, identity, and patriotism. Set during the Franco-Prussian War, it captures a young boy's experience as he attends his final French lesson in a small village in Alsace, now annexed by Prussia. Let's begin the chapter by knowing a little about its author. Alphonse Daudet was a French novelist and short story writer. The last lesson is set in the days of the Franco-Prussian War, in which France was defeated by Prussia led by Bismarck. Prussia then consisted of what now are the nations of Germany, Poland and parts of Austria. In this story, the French districts of Alsace and Lorraine have passed into Prussian hands. Read the story to find out what effect this had on life at school. Before we delve into the detailed explanation of the chapter, let's have a look at its theme. The primary theme of the story is the importance of preserving one's language and culture. It emphasizes the role of education in maintaining national identity and the profound sense of loss that comes with the suppression of one's native language. Now we will begin the paragraph-wise explanation of the chapter. Before we do so, I recommend you to pause and read text on each slide before listening to its explanation. This approach will deepen your understanding as we go through our detailed analysis. Let us begin the explanation now. The lesson starts with the narrator, Franz, running late for school. He fears being scolded, especially since there's a participles test he isn't prepared for. The narrator is tempted to bunk school for the beautiful weather and watch the Prussian soldiers drill, but ultimately decides to go to class. In these lines we see Franz passing a crowd at the town hall bulletin board, which usually brought bad news. Watchter, the blacksmith, told him he had plenty of time to get to school, which Franz took as mockery. In these lines we learn, arriving at school, Franz finds an unusual stillness. Expecting the usual noise and bustle, he is surprised to see his classmates already in their places and Hamel walking with his ruler. Nervously, he enters the classroom. In these lines we learn the narrator hesitantly enters the quiet classroom, fearing punishment. However, the teacher is kind and simply tells him to take his seat. The narrator then notices the teacher dressed unusually formally, a detail hinting at the importance of the day. The classroom itself feels strange and solemn, but the biggest surprise comes from seeing the usually empty backbenches filled with silent villagers, including respected figures from the community. The scene opens with a somber mood. Everyone appears sad, and an old villager even brought a well-worn primer. The teacher, addressing everyone with kindness and gravity, announces this is their last French lesson. A German teacher will take over tomorrow. This news hits the narrator like a thunderclap, finally making him understand the reason for the morning's announcements. In these lines we learn the realization of losing French lessons sparks regret in the narrator. He feels unprepared, like he can barely write. The thought of not learning French altogether fills him with despair. He reflects on neglecting his studies, wishing he had paid more attention instead of playing outside. He realizes his books, grammar, and history of the saints, which appeared as nuisances before. The narrator now sees them as old friends. The imminent departure of their teacher, Hamel, adds a layer of sadness. The realization that he will never see him again makes him forget any previous annoyance with his teacher's strictness. In these lines we see Franz understanding why Hamel was dressed up and why villagers were present. It was in honor of his final French lesson. Everyone was regretting having neglected learning French, and they were there to pay respects to their language and the departing teacher. When Franz was called upon to recite, he was overwhelmed with a newfound desire to perform well. However, his unpreparedness made him stumble, highlighting the gravity of the situation. In these lines we learn the teacher shows surprising understanding, sensing the narrator's dejection. He scolds not the student but the collective habit of procrastination that led them all here. He highlights the future taunts they might face for not speaking their own language well. While offering some sympathy to Franz, the teacher admits everyone shares the blame for neglecting their French language. In these lines we find Hamel analyzing the causes behind loss of their mother tongue and two French districts of Alsace and Lorraine. The teacher shifts the blame from the students to a combination of factors. Parents prioritized work for more income, and the teacher himself sometimes neglected his duties. Hamel then launches into a passionate speech about the French language. He declares it the most beautiful, logical language, urging them to cherish and preserve it. he delivers a powerful metaphor, stating that language is the key to a prisoner's jail, highlighting its importance in maintaining their identity. Finally, he dives into teaching them the grammar lesson. In these lines we learn the narrator is amazed at how well he understood the French teacher, M. Hamel. Everything he said seemed easy, and the narrator had never listened so carefully before. M. Hamel's patient explanations made it feel as if he wanted to share all his knowledge with the students before leaving. After the grammar lesson, there was a writing lesson. On that particular day, M. Hamel distributed new copies of written work to the students. These copies were beautifully written in a round hand, and they contained the names France and Alsace. The copies looked like little flags hanging everywhere in the schoolroom, symbolizing the importance of their French identity and heritage. This scene depicts a complete transformation in the classroom. Everyone is engrossed in their French lesson, a stark contrast to the usual noise and distractions. The silence is broken only by the scratching of pens. Even the children, usually drawn to outside stimuli, are completely focused on their work. The narrator's final thought in this section extends the emphasis on language to the birds, wondering if even their coos will be regulated under German rule. In these lines the narrator describes a melancholic atmosphere. M. Hamel sits motionless, soaking in the familiar sights of the classroom, etching them into his memory. The details paint a picture of a routine unchanged for 40 years. The narrator imagines the teacher's heartbreak at having to leave everything behind, including his home and established life. The mention of his sister packing their bags emphasizes the impending departure and the finality of the situation. In these lines we learn despite the sadness, M. Hamel continues teaching until the end. During the history lesson, Old Hauser, using a primer and struggling with his emotions, the narrator describes the scene as both comical and tearful, highlighting the mixed emotions everyone feels. The narrator remembers nostalgically that last lesson. The final part depicts the dramatic conclusion of the lesson. The chime of the clock and the Prussian trumpets mark the end of the class time. The teacher, choked with emotion, tries to speak but fails. He then writes a powerful message on the board in large letters, Vive la France, which translates to, Long live France. This act of defiance becomes a symbolic stand for the French language and identity. The teacher, unable to speak further, gestures silently, dismissing the class. In conclusion, the last lesson highlights the emotional impact of losing one's cultural heritage. Through the character of M. Hamel and the villagers, Daudet conveys a deep sense of nostalgia and regret, leaving a lasting message about the value of one's mother tongue. With this the chapter ends. Here is the list of literary devices used in the chapter. Pause the video and go through it and stay tuned for more entertaining explanations of our upcoming lessons. Thank you for joining us. Kindly like and subscribe if you found the lesson helpful. See you in the next lesson.